chapter 33, section 1, and it's called A Conservative Movement Emerges. Conservatism, which I'm going to try to define modern conservatism in today's lesson, reached a high point with the election of 1980, and that is the election of Ronald Reagan, and then Vice President, who would be President, George H.W. Bush. Not to be confused with George W. Bush, his son, George H.W. Bush. So this is the election of 1980. And we're going to talk about the key conservative issues in 1980. So the first one I want to talk about is entitlement programs. You know, the modern day conservative prides themselves on their self-reliance. It's really an ethos of modern conservatism that I don't need help from anybody. I built up my own life. I take care of my own family. I don't ask anybody for anything. I earn my way. I don't take handouts. That's, again, part of the ethos of modern conservatism. And that's a point of pride. But in turn, that can also lead a person who feels strongly about that to say, if that's how I live my life, why should I support programs that enable people to not have to live that way? If I work hard to have insurance for myself, then why should my taxes go to someone who does not? Or if I work hard to send my kids to Carolina Day, which, if I had to guess, costs somewhere around $1,000 a month. And if I have work hard to send my kids to Carolina Day, why should I have to pay taxes to pay for some family who does not? Because the bottom line, again, is the money. You see, if we don't have public schools, if we don't have health care for the poor or elderly, if we don't have retirement programs for everyone through Social Security, we could cut our taxes by half. And if I'm a conservative and I believe taxation is theft, then I'm claiming that in many cases a third of my check is being stolen from me every month. And it's going to these people that I don't care about. And I'm going to start calling that entitlement programs. Because number one, these provide guaranteed benefits to specific groups. When the conservative may feel they've earned their way, these groups, according to the conservative in their point of view, they may not feel that way. These things are expensive. And then secondly, we've all heard stories of fraud and waste and embezzlement. If you haven't, you should. Big pots of money out there being used for the public good. That's very tempting, isn't it? Sure glad no one's ever tried to steal that money before. Right? Yeah. And so many are skeptical. I don't know if I trust the government with that kind of money. Look at their track record. And also, you know, you've got to start thinking about this coalition in 1980 specifically. And so quite a few were skeptical over civil rights rulings like busing over long distances. Okay, so Charlotte Mecklenburg v. United States said that busing can be used to integrate schools. Well, the conservative looking at this, again, we're just talking economics right now, saying, okay, you know how much fuel in a bus cost? It's $100 to fill that tank one time. I used to drive a bus. It's $100 worth of fuel to fill the bus one time. How much fuel does it take to get from Edneyville to here and back every single day? Can't that kid just go to North? I mean, what's wrong with North? You're telling me I got to pay extra to send that kid here? For what? Some social issue, some philosophical thing? Again, I'm just giving you this point of view. And so this is part of a big coalition called the New Right. It's grassroots groups, meaning, yeah, okay, the Bill Gates people, okay, the billionaires are a big part of this. But when I say grassroots, I'm talking about common folk. Common folk often tied to single issues. One of these was affirmative action. You're telling me my kid didn't get into that school because he's white? And he was more qualified than this person who's a minority? And the Supreme Court's already ruled that's wrong. And so again, that makes some people angry. And many called it reverse discrimination. And guess what? The Republican coalition in 1980 capitalized on that and said, I bet you're angry about that. I tell you what, if you elect me, I'm going to do something about that. And sure enough, there were a number of people that's it. That's all they had to hear. There were also business groups. We talked a lot already about the economics of this. They're like, look, if we stimulate the economy by giving the money to poor people through various entitlement programs, what are they going to do with that money? And they could pull 10 people up on a stand. If you got $1 million, what would you do? Whee! Go to Vegas! Yeah. Of course that's what you would do. Why? Because you've never had that kind of money. You don't know what to do with it, is what they would say. So these business groups say, okay, what is the more effective investment according to their point of view? They're going to argue that if you invest that money into people who already invest money wisely for a living, aka billionaires, who have a track record of doing well with their money, what are they going to do with that? They're going to invest it into profitable businesses, which will translate to more jobs from a certain point of view. And so, yeah, business groups are part of this. Also, religious groups. You got to remember, Roe v. Wade, the legalization of abortion was 1979. Case in point, Jimmy Carter picked up a lot of the evangelical vote as a Democrat in 1976. And that was one of the last times, if not the last time, that a Democrat picked up the evangelical vote. Period. Why? Roe v. Wade changed things. So, the big goals of the conservative coalition: number one, smaller government. Because if taxation is theft, stop it. Family values. Them dang hippies. Enough said. Patriotism. Better red than dead. That's a liberal thing. My son served in Vietnam. I fought in Korea. My dad fought in World War II. What are you going to do about it? Patriotism. Better have an American flag on your door. And then finally, yes, pro-business. These are parts of the ethos, the culture of modern conservatism. Speaking of the religious piece, this was often perpetuated by public religious figures. I guess Franklin Graham is one for the evangelicals today. These are people that you might follow on social media or back in the 70s might appear on television all the time. The big one of the 70s was Jerry Falwell. He was a TV preacher. Billy Graham was another TV preacher. And these people weren't just preaching their religion. They were endorsing political candidates. They were personal friends with Ronald Reagan. They went to the White House to advise him on matters, not just of spirituality, but on public decisions. And these candidates identified with these religious figures because it gave them influence over people who looked up to those religious figures. Constantine once said Rome's worth a mass, and every American president has agreed since. And so Ronald Reagan won the 1980 presidential election. His running mate was George Herbert Walker Bush. Reagan had started his career as an actor. In fact, he was one of the few actors who testified against his friends. He was no Hollywood 10. He testified against his friends during the Communist Red Scare. He went into politics. He served 2 terms as governor of California, in fact. And so some of his key issues were, number 1, the struggling economy, the Iran crisis. Yeah, right at the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency, I know there was a long lesson the other day, but Ayatollah Khomeini seized power in Iran. We helped the Shah of Iran escape to the United States. The people of Iran seized the American embassy, holding hostages, 52 American citizens hostage. And it was a very tense situation. There were people burning American flags on public television. What do we do about this? And Ronald Reagan said, I can fix it. In fact, he did, through some really sketchy stuff that we'll talk about later. But he promised to fix it, and he did. People called him the Great Communicator. Because you see, Ronald Reagan had a talent for taking very complicated issues and making them feel very simple. I mean, if you watch the new Avengers movie, and I won't spoil it, you got a lesson in quantum physics. I mean, it blew my mind. I was like, hang on a second. Yeah, and it went over my head at first, and I had to think about it, and then I was like, oh, here's Captain America to explain it to me. Okay. Now I understand quantum. Thank you, Captain America. Yeah. That's all. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Don't spoil it.
Yeah, and no spoilers. You're fine. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what quantum physics is either, but I mean, Captain America kind of explained it. Yeah.
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 America knew that much.
Yeah. And that's that's all I have to say about it. Well, the point is, if you can take a complicated issue and you can make it simple, you really understand that issue. And more importantly, you can connect with people who are trying to understand that issue. And maybe even more importantly, you can convince them. You know, if you can help someone understand a complicated issue, you can convince them your own way. And he was really a great communicator. He picked up 51% of the popular vote. Yes, a Republican can win the popular vote. It did happen, 1980. There you go. And he picked up 44 states. You know, let's call that a sweep.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Congratulations, sir.
Government, not the other way around.
With his new conservative agenda, Reagan promises the most sweeping political shift since Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the New Deal in the 1930s.
It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people. Let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look.